Welcome to According to Sam, folks. Happy Monday. Thank you guys for tuning in. It's already been a very eventful Monday so far. We got the 9-0 Supreme Court ruling on the states like Maine and Colorado. The particular case that was in the Supreme Court was the ruling on the Colorado removing Trump from their ballots, but the ruling pertains to all states, so Trump won't be removed from the ballots. Now, anyone who watched oral arguments, anyone with a brain knew that this was going to be the case. Anyone with the brain knows that Trump didn't commit an insurrection. A insurrection is a real insurrection is what I've been telling you about over the few weeks that went down in Kiev in 2014. That was a real insurrection. That was a real coup d'etat, what we have been talking about, and we're going to get back into talking about today, because it seems that all these people that are screaming about democracy this and democracy that, and we have to protect our democracy and save democracy and democracy and democracy. These are the people that seem to hate democracy the most. And the United States is not a democracy, not in the true sense. We are a representative democracy. The founders of this country, they did not want a pure democracy, and we're not a pure democracy. But we are a representative democracy. We vote for our representatives, and that's the nature of our system. But in the essence of democracy is the vote, the ballot. And to remove someone from a ballot and not let the people vote for them, how's that democracy? Again, going back to Ukraine, you have, two factions in Ukraine. We're going to get back into it in this podcast. And when we pick up Ukraine again, we're going to be looking at what happened after the coup, post-coup. February, the snipers started shooting, kicked off the violence on February 20th. The violence lasted for February 20th, the 21st, the 22nd. Things had started to subside, and Yanukovych was out by the 23rd. So after the coup d'etat, after February 23rd, we're going to talk about what happened in Ukraine from that point when we pick it up today. But you had two factions at that point. You had the coup faction, the people from Western Ukraine, Nazis, nationalists, and they had just staged a coup in the capital city. You had the separatists, they call them the separatists, the people who identified with Russia. Let me show you guys what we're talking about here. This is, so over the last couple of days, I watched the movie Ukraine on Fire again, because I just wanted, I've seen that movie so many times, and people, I go into a lot of details about what happened in Ukraine in this podcast over the past few weeks. A lot of the details that I cover in my podcast here are not covered in the film, but the film, and it's done very, very well, the film covers a lot of details that I'm not even covering here on my podcast. This is so nuanced. You have to be a thinking person. You have to be able to filter through all of the fake news, all of the BS, and to understand, what went on in Ukraine. But yet the faction of the people who had just staged a coup in Kiev, and then you had the separatists in Odessa, in Crimea, in the Donetsk region. And these people are putting referendums on the calendar. They're going to the polls and they're voting. Each one of those communities that identified with Russia, they didn't just, after the people from the West and the Nazis and the nationalists, when they staged a coup, they didn't just stage a coup in Crimea and in Donetsk. They set referendums. They went to, and I'm going to show you today, they went to, but so again, the point I'm making is, again, they're telling you, Amy Klobuchar just tweeted out this morning, we have to pass the Ukraine funding to support democracy. And you should look at all the comments underneath. It's like, Ukraine hasn't had elections in what, 6 years? How's that a democracy? Is it a democracy when they staged the coup in 2014? But that's the point I'm making, is that the people who you see that are screaming the most about saving our democracy, they hate democracy the most. And they're the ones who tried to keep Trump off the ballot. And now the Supreme Court says that you can't keep him off the ballots. They're the ones who denied the referendums that were passed in Donetsk and in Lugansk and in Crimea. They said those referendums were not valid. They hate democracy, people. They hate democracy. So Trump came out today and he gave a short speech after the Supreme Court ruling. It says something very interesting. It's about 15-minute speech, but he says something very interesting that I want to highlight. Take a listen to former President Donald Trump.
I want to stop wars. I want to stop the war in Ukraine with Russia. I want to stop what's happening in Israel.
So he says that he wants to stop the war in Ukraine. He wants to stop what's happening in Israel. Have you ever heard Joe Biden say that he wants to stop the war in Ukraine? Have you ever heard any of these people that are calling for more funding and more weapons and to throw more logs on the fire? Have you heard any of them say that they want to stop the war in Ukraine? Joe Biden's going to do his State of the Union in a couple of days. Will Joe Biden call for the war in Ukraine to stop? Now, he may call for the war in Israel to stop because he's bleeding voters because of his Genocide Joe persona. That's what they call him, Genocide Joe. So he's bleeding voters. He may call for a ceasefire on Thursday or to stop that war. But Ukraine, have you ever heard this guy call for stopping or say that he wants to stop the war in Ukraine? No, because if Joe Biden said that, if he said that that he wanted to stop the war in Ukraine, the very first question would be like, well, why don't you? Why don't you stop the war in Ukraine? No one is in a greater position right now to stop the war in Ukraine than Joseph Biden. No one. He could stop the war in Ukraine. He could call for Vladimir Putin's already come out and says that he wants a truce, that he's willing to negotiate. We're going to get into this here in a moment. Vladimir Putin started negotiating from the beginning. I wanted to show you this too. This is, so also in the speech that Donald Trump made this morning in reaction to the Supreme Court ruling, he was also saying that this was a great ruling by the Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court also has to rule that the president has immunity from prosecution. And I want you to listen to what this CBS, or this is MSNBC reporter says in response to Trump's saying that that the Supreme Court needs to, now that they've ruled on them removing me from the ballot, now they need to rule that not me, the executive, has immunity. And listen to what this guy says.
What he's doing is he's grasping at the legitimate argument that there are some cases where perhaps a president should be immune based on the decisions that he or she makes. And he's sort of trying to embrace that argument and use that as a shield. And he's, again, talking about drone strikes that he argued, targeted killings, which, by the way, were not even controversial under law. When people talk about that, whether drone strikes being controversial, they talk about Barack Obama's decision to kill an American citizen, Anwar al-Awlaki. But there was nothing about taking out the leader of ISIS or an Iranian general was remotely illegal under U.S. law. But yeah, I mean, nothing about.
So this is so dishonest. This is why I do this podcast, people, because these people in our media are so dishonest. So he calls Anwar al-Awlaki the leader of ISIS, which Anwar al-Awlaki was not the leader of ISIS. ISIS. The leader of ISIS was Baghdadi, and Trump killed Baghdadi. Trump killed the general from Iran, who he mentions as well. So Trump killed Baghdadi. Obama armed ISIS. Obama made Baghdadi more powerful and ISIS more powerful because he armed them through the Free Syrian Army. So this guy being so dishonest, he brings up Anwar al-Awlaki, who was not the leader of ISIS, but he alludes to the fact that Anwar al-Awlaki is the leader of ISIS, and that the killing of Anwar al-Awlaki was not controversial. It was absolutely controversial. It's still controversial. Anwar al-Awlaki was not a leader of ISIS. Anwar al-Awlaki was an American-born American citizen who had rights. He had rights to due process. And Obama did not only kill him, he killed his minor teenage son in a separate attack, who was also an American, who also had rights as due process rights. So this guy's being completely dishonest. It was absolutely controversial, the killing of Anwar al-Awlaki and his son. And Anwar al-Awlaki was not the leader of ISIS. Baghdadi was the leader of ISIS, who Trump killed. And the general from Iran, who Trump killed in Iraq, also, those were not controversial. But again, even if they were, it would go to Trump's point why the president needs immunity.
Targeted killings, which, by the way, were not even controversial under law. When people talk about that, whether drone strikes being controversial, they talk about Barack Obama's decision to kill an American citizen, Anwar al-Awlaki. But there was nothing about taking out the leader of ISIS or an Iranian general was remotely illegal under U.S. law. But yeah, I mean, nothing about.
So it's so dishonest. I mean, he tries to conflate the two, the fact that Obama killed an American with due process rights and conflate them with al-Baghdadi and the Iranian general, I forget his name, who Trump killed. These people are so evil. They're so dishonest. All right, let's get back into talking about Ukraine. And before we get back into that, I want to read a little bit we'll read the first paragraph of the Declaration of Independence. It says, the unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America. This is the Declaration of Independence. This is one of our founding documents. This is, honestly, I had to say what the founding document was. It would be this one, and then the Constitution. And but I mean, so Declaration of Independence here. It says, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal situation to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitled them. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the cause which impelled them to the separation. Separation. Why do I read that? Because this is what happened after the coup d'etat in Ukraine, and the people of Donetsk, the people of Lugansk, the people of Crimea, the people of Odessa, that they had come to a point after the Orange Revolution in 2004, after the continued strife between the Yushchenko government, Eula. I haven't even told you guys about Eula yet. And then the turmoil in the beginning of the Yanukovych, and we're going to talk about some of those things in the beginning of his administration when he finally comes to power. Because if you remember, Yanukovych ran against Yushchenko in 2004 in the Orange Revolution. He won that election, was basically robbed from him with the Color Revolution. And then so Yanukovych finally comes into power in 2010, and there's some turmoil that happens in his first couple of years in office, and then the Maidan coup happens at the end of his term. So the people in Donetsk, Lugansk, Crimea, Odessa, they have seen this stuff and this back and forth going on for years in Ukraine, and they're fed up after the coup. So it becomes necessary for them to dissolve the political bands which have connected them to Ukraine. And they assumed among the powers of the earth the separate and equal situation to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitled them. So we were talking in the last podcast about who are the freedom fighters. Mitt Romney says that the United States of America, that we stand up for the freedom fighters. We identify with the freedom fighters, the United States patriots who declared their independence from Britain. They were freedom fighters, and just like Britain, when the American colonists declared their independence, Britain came over to the New World, over to North America to establish their dominance, to establish the fact that no, you cannot separate, that you are our subjects. And that's what happened in Ukraine. That's what happened when the people in Donbass decided that they wanted to be independent and they declared their independence. The force from Kiev, sponsored by the CIA and the American government, the big bullies that we went into the Donbass region, and we didn't go in there. We gave the weapons to Ukraine. We trained Ukraine. The CIA were training them, and we told them to go and fight the separatists in the east. So the coup happened, and these are the guys who did it right here. We listened to the phone call in the last podcast. This is Oli Book. This is Klitschko. This is Yatsenyuk. And this is Nuland. And these people staged a coup in Ukraine. And then when they staged a coup in Ukraine, one of the first things they did, and let's not forget about this guy, Alexander Tochinov, because he becomes the president, the acting president of the interim government. Hold on one moment. Let me get this clip set up, because
in Ukraine.
Okay, here we go.
The status of the Russian language in Ukraine has been a stumbling block for many years.
Implementing Russian as a second state language was one of the main campaign promises of President Viktor Yanukovych.
In 2012, the Yanukovych government passed a law making it the second official language in the southern and eastern parts of Ukraine, the areas where the Russian-speaking population makes up a majority.
So let's go back. I want you to see
Parts
this
of Ukraine.
map. So this map kind of shows, so this is Odessa here, Crimea, the Donetsk region. These regions, all the regions in yellow here, identified more with Russia, did not go along with the coup. These are all the regions that wanted to separate after the coup. The regions over here in red, these are the nationalists, the Nazis. Again, they hate the Russian-speaking Ukrainians. So this is in 2012, they're talking about here in this clip. And I told you there was some turmoil in the beginning of the Yanukovych administration when he came in 2010. One of the first things he does, and they talk about this in the movie Ukraine on Fire, he removes the hero status that was given to a Nazi, Stefan Bandera, is this Nazi who is worshipped in the East. Bandera was actually a leader of a group that was connected to the actual Nazis, the German Nazis in the 1930s, 1940s, and he is a hero in the West. So when Viktor Yushchenko is president, he establishes a hero status onto Stefan Bandera. So one of the first things that Yanukovych does is he removes that hero status when he comes in 2010. That it establishes a huge rift between the people in the West and the people in the East. And then he does this language law where he sets up the Russian language to be equal as the Ukrainian language in these regions. In these regions.
Viktor Yanukovych.
In 2012, the Yanukovych government passed a law making it the second.
So I want to show you more of this real quick. This they're showing you. So these are the regions where he made the Russian language equal to the Ukrainian language. Huge, emotional, huge. This was a big issue in Ukraine, and I'm going to show you how big it was. And he shows you a little bit of the fight that they have here in the parliament. But I'm going to show you more of this fight.
2012, so the Yanukovych government passed a law making it the second.
I'm going to show you what happened. And so anyway, what that does, that law, it made the Russian language in the East, where most people spoke the Russian language, it made it the official language in court proceedings, on official documents, on ballots. And the people in Western Ukraine did not like that. They're nationalists. They want one nation, one language. So I was going to show you more of this fight in Parliament after Yanukovych passes this language law. This is what happened in the Ukrainian Parliament. Take a look. It's crazy. This is crazy. This is taking place in the Ukrainian parliament. And this is all over Viktor Yanukovych establishing Russia as the important thing to understand too is that Yanukovych is not saying that the Ukrainian language is any less significant for the people who speak this language in the West, but he's just saying that for the people who speak Russian in the East, that they're going to be able to use the language that they speak in official proceedings. And look at this. This is how emotional it gets. This is crazy. Could you imagine this happening in Congress? Crazy. It's crazy. Wow. All right, so this is a reaction to this language law that Yanukovych puts into place. So that's what's going on here in this clip. And this clip is from Ukraine on Fire that I'm playing right now.
Been a stumbling block for many years.
Implementing Russian as a second state language was one of the main campaign promises of President Viktor Yanukovych.
In 2012, the Yanukovych government passed a law making it the second official language in the southern and eastern parts of Ukraine, the areas where the Russian-speaking population makes up a majority. Ukrainian nationalist groups initiated massive protests opposing the law. An observing viewer might see some familiar
Who's this? So this is the nationalist
protests
groups who
opposing
are opposing the law, the 2012 law of Yanukovych, and they had huge protests. The nationalist groups from the east, you can see the Swoboda flags here. So they're protesting this language law. This is 2012, 2 years before the coup. They're protesting this language law, and you can see
an observing viewer might see
Arseny Yatsenyuk leading the protest. Arseny Yatsenyuk.
Familiar faces there.
Look, Oli Tanibuk right there. So 2 years before the coup, these guys, these Nazis and ultra nationalists from the East are leading protests against Yanukovych for this language law. This guy becomes the new prime minister after the coup, people. He becomes the new prime minister after the coup. This is the guy that Barack Obama brings to the Oval Office. This is the guy who Victoria Nuland in the phone call is saying that he should be the new leader, that he should be the new prime minister. And they're there. These Nazis are there 2 years earlier protesting this new language law.
On February 23, 2014, the very next day after the regime change.
Now listen to this. Listen to this. This is the day after the coup. I told you the shooting started on the 20th. You had violence all that day and night of the 20th. The 21st, things started to subside on the 22nd. Yanukovych leaves on the 23rd. So the new coup government, the interim government, they're coming in, and it's the Nazis. It's all the guys that I told you about. Yatsenyuk is the prime minister. The new president, interim president, is Alexander Tochnov, and they start. And this is what this clip is talking about here. What they do immediately.
The new government voted for an annulment of the official status of the Russian language.
Do you hear this? One of the first.
On February 23, 2014, the very next day after the regime change, the new government voted for an annulment of the official status of the Russian language.
So one of the first things they do, is they repeal this law that Yanukovych had put in place 2 years earlier, this controversial, very emotional law that made the Russian language in the East an official language. So the new Nazi government, these people who were protesting against it 2 years earlier, they stage a coup d'etat with the help of the American government, and they were against the law because they're protesting against it 2 years earlier. One of the first things they do is repeal the law, making Russia the official language. Now, Alexander Tochnov, who is the acting president. I don't understand why he did this. I really don't know exactly if it was the Obama administration who told him that he should veto the repeal of that law, or if, because they, at this point, they didn't want these separatists to separate. And so, repealing this law was going to kind of be a olive branch to them, is what I think. But there's no way that he supported the Russian language being an official language of Ukraine. He's a nationalist as well. This guy he invented the party. He created the party. Where is it at? Where's the political party that this guy here? People's Front. So Alexander Tochnov created the party, the People's Front. So it's an ultra-nationalist, ultra-conservative party. So there's no way that Alexander Tochnov agreed with the Russian language being official language. But for some reason, he vetoed the repeal of that 2012 law. But it didn't matter. It didn't matter. At that point, these Nazis, the interim government, had showed their hand. So because they did that, that's why the people in Crimea, the people in Donetsk started to move to separate, because this new government is already showing itself to be hostile to us. Let's listen to a little bit of Vladimir Putin, the interview he did with Tucker Carlson a few weeks ago, and what he says here.
In 2014, there was a coup. They started persecuting those who did not accept the coup, and it was...
So listen to what he says. In 2014, there was a coup. They started persecuting those who didn't accept the coup. That's what he says. This is exactly what happened. What Putin says here is exactly what happened. This is what I've been telling you, that there was a coup, and then the people who didn't support the coup, they started to be persecuted by the Nazis, not only the Nazis in the government, but the Nazis on the ground, like the right sector. And we're going to get into talking about the right sector's role and what they were doing into intimidating these people into compliance. Putin, again.
There was a coup. They started persecuting those who did not accept the coup, and it was indeed a coup. They created a threat to Crimea, which we had to take under our protection.
So listen to what Putin's saying. So after the coup, they started persecuting the people who didn't accept the coup. They started to threaten Crimea, which we've had a naval base in Crimea again since the late 18th century, since Sebastopol. Most of the people, I want you to look at this. This is a map of the election in 2004. And these are the lines. This is the line. So the people who are more aligned with the West and the nationalists and the Nazis are in red. The people who are aligned with Russia are in the yellow here. The higher numbers that you see here. Now, this is the 2004 election, but it's still in 2014, it would have been very similar numbers. But the places with the higher numbers in yellow you can make the relationship that they have a higher connection to Russia. So this is Crimea, 82%, the Donetsk and Lugansk region, 96, 92%. So these people are very well connected to Russia. Their border is on the border with Russia. Crimea here there's a land bridge that goes across here. They're connected to Russia. So these people are all connected to Russia. So that's what Putin is saying here. He's saying that they staged a coup, and then the Nazi groups like Right Sector, I was telling you how they started to spill out of Kiev and out of the West and come down into Odessa and into Crimea and start to intimidate these people and force their compliance. So that's why Putin's saying they started to threaten Crimea, so we had to take action. All right, back to Putin here.
They started persecuting those who did not accept the coup, and it was indeed a coup. They created a threat to Crimea, which we had to take under our protection. They launched the war in Donbass in 2014 with the use of aircraft and artillery against civilians. This is when it all started. There is a video of aircraft attacking Donetsk from above. They launched a large-scale military operation, then another one. When they failed, they started to prepare the next one. All this against the background of military development of this territory and opening of NATO's doors. How could we not express concern over what was happening? From our side, this would have been a culpable negligence. That's what it would have been. It's just that the U.S. political leadership pushed us to the line we could not cross.
They pushed us. They kept pushing us, and they kept pushing us. And I mean, if you know what happened, I mean, the Obama administration, they caused all of this, people, all of this.
Because doing so could have...
I tell you what, Obama better hope that that the Supreme Court rules that the executive is immune from prosecution, because if the Supreme Court comes back and says that the president is not immune for prosecution, man, Obama is opened up for a lot of prosecution. You guys don't even know, because the media covered for him for 8 years. They're still covering for him. I mean, most people who worship and idolize Obama don't know anything about him and what he did in his administration.
With the backing of CIA, of course. The organization you wanted to join back in.
Let's go back here.
What is that supposed to mean? Who do you think you are?
He said that he wanted to
As the Americans requested, Yanukovych did use neither the armed forces nor the police. Yet,
and that's what I was saying in the last podcast, that John McCain and Christopher Murphy and the American government had no right to tell Yanukovych that he couldn't use force to clear the square.
Let the situation unfold in the scenario of a very close since the times of the Soviet Union. One enterprise there used to produce components to be assembled both in Russia and Ukraine, and vice versa. They used to be very close ties. It's just that the U.S. political leadership pushed us to the line we could not cross, because doing so could have ruined Russia itself. Besides, we could not leave our brothers in faith, in fact, a part of Russian people, in the face of this war machine.
But that was 8 years before the current conflict started. So what was the trigger for you? What was the moment where you decided you had to do this?
Initially, it was the coup in Ukraine that provoked the conflict. By the way, back then the representatives of 3 European countries, Germany, Poland and France, arrived. They were the guarantors of the signed agreement between the government of Yanukovych and the opposition. They signed it as guarantors. Despite that, the opposition committed a coup, and all these countries pretended that they didn't remember that they were guarantors of the peaceful settlement.
Exactly.
They just threw it in the stove.
This goes back to the Victoria Nuland phone call when she says F the EU, and we're going to get the UN involved. The UN's going to come in and seal this thing. This is what Putin says. That's why she said F the EU, is because, like Putin is saying here, that Germany and these other European countries, the EU, had signed an agreement for a peaceful settlement. They had put their names on it. And he says that after the coup happens, they act like they hadn't made this agreement. But that's why Victoria Nuland says F the EU, because F the EU, these 3 countries that he's saying from the EU had agreed to a peaceful settlement with Yanukovych.
Initially, it was the coup in Ukraine that provoked the conflict. By the way, back then the representatives of 3 European countries, Germany, Poland, and France, arrived.
Germany, Poland, and France. So that's why she says F the EU. That's why she says F the EU, we're going to get the UN involved.
That provoked the conflict. By the way, back then the representatives of 3 European countries, Germany, Poland, and France, arrived. They were the guarantors of the signed agreement between the government of Yanukovych and the opposition. They signed it as guarantors. Despite that, the opposition committed a coup, and all these countries pretended that they didn't remember that they were guarantors of the peaceful settlement. They just threw it in the stove right away, and nobody recalls that. I don't know if the U.S. know anything about the agreement between the opposition and the authorities.
No, she knew. Victoria Nuland did know about that agreement. That's why she says F them. We're going to go with the UN.
And nobody recalls that. I don't know if the U.S. know anything about the agreement between the opposition and the authorities, and its 3 guarantors who, instead of bringing this whole situation back in the political field, supported the coup. Although it was meaningless, believe me. Because
so they talk about this, if you watch the movie Ukraine on Fire, they talk about these 3 countries coming in and trying to negotiate peace between the opposition and Yanukovych, and they talk about in the movie why that failed.
Instead of bringing this whole situation back in the political field, supported the coup. Although it was meaningless, believe me. Because President Yanukovych agreed to all conditions, he was ready to hold an early election which he had no chance of winning, frankly speaking. Everyone knew that. Then why the coup? Why the victims?
Why? It makes no sense. Everything that Putin is saying here is absolutely right. That there was that Yanukovych had agreed to a early election that he most likely was not going to win. He had made all these agreements with the help of Germany, France, and Poland negotiating. Why the coup? What was the reason for the coup? It makes no sense except the loss of life and more war, and I guess, to loot the American people and the European people who are paying for this war, and so the military-industrial complex can make more money off of weapons. That would be the only reason that I can think of. But that's a legitimate question. Why was the coup necessary and so much loss of life? Even to this day, right now, many lives have been lost because of this war in Ukraine, and it was all unnecessary, is what Putin was saying.
One knew that. Then why the coup? Why the victims? Why threatening Crimea? Why launching an operation in Donbass? This I do not understand. That is exactly what the miscalculation is. CIA did its job to complete the coup. I think one of the deputy secretaries of state said that it cost a large sum of money, almost $5 billion.
So he's talking about Victoria Nuland when he says, so Victoria Nuland does make a statement that we've invested, she says, invested $5 billion. And remember, George Soros says that I've invested $1 billion of my own money and I'm going to make a killing when this thing's over. So that's what he's talking about here. He's talking about Victoria Nuland.
That is exactly what the miscalculation is. CIA did its job to complete the coup. I think one of the deputy secretaries of state said that it cost a large sum of money, almost $5 billion.
Not cost,
but the political mistake.
Not cost. Victoria Nuland doesn't say that it cost us a large sum of money. She says that we have invested $5 billion. I want to show you that. And then we'll come back here to Putin. Let's see here. She says we have invested $5 billion.
Since Ukraine's independence in 1991, the United States has supported Ukrainians as they build democratic skills and institutions, as they promote civic participation and good governance, all of which are preconditions for Ukraine to achieve its European aspirations. We've invested over $5 billion to assist Ukraine in these and other goals that will ensure a secure and prosperous and democratic Ukraine.
So we invested $5 billion, is what she said. And that's what Putin is talking about here, talking about Victoria Nuland, saying back then that we've invested $5 billion. Now we've invested over $100 billion, and they're trying to get us to invest $60 billion more. And remember, again, George Soros invested, he says that I invested $1 billion of my own money, that I'm a political philanthropist, but this ain't philanthropy here. I invested $1 billion of my own money, and I'm going to make a killing, expecting a return. So that's what Putin is talking about here. And I asked the question when I played the clips of George Soros, who else is invested? Who else has investments in Ukraine?
Everyone knew that. Then why the coup? Why the victims? Why threatening Crimea? Why launching an operation in Donbass? This I do not understand. That is exactly what the miscalculation is. CIA did its job to complete the coup. I think one of the deputy secretaries of state said that it cost a large sum of money, almost $5 billion. But the political mistake was colossal. Why would they have to do that? All this could have been done legally, without victims, without military action, without losing Crimea. We would have never considered to even lift a finger if it hadn't been for the bloody developments on Maidan.
Listen to what he says there. I mean, this could have all been done legally, without loss of lives, without losing Crimea. That Ukraine would have never lost Crimea if they would have done this legally and done this without a bloody coup. He says that we would have never lifted a finger. We would have never lifted a finger, is what he's saying, if it wasn't for the bloody coup in Maidan. He's talking about Crimea. We would have never lifted a finger, and we would have never had to protect the people of Crimea if they wouldn't have done this bloody coup, is what he's saying.
Military action without losing Crimea. We would have never considered to even lift a finger if it hadn't been for the bloody developments on Maidan.
So they're telling you that Russia and Putin invaded Crimea. They're telling you that's what happened, that Russia invaded Crimea and took Crimea over. He's saying, no, we didn't do that. We didn't invade Crimea and take Crimea over. We never would have lifted a finger in Crimea if it wasn't for the bloody coup that you guys staged in Kiev. Now, I want you to look. This is again from the movie Ukraine on Fire, and I want you to listen to what happened in Crimea. What happened in Crimea was the people of Crimea, because the majority of the people in Crimea identified with Russia. And they wanted protection because the right sector and these other Nazis were going to come down into Crimea to start intimidating them. Just take a look at this clip.
And things rapidly escalated.
Voters will decide Sunday whether they'll leave Ukraine and join Russia.
The campaign with the slogan "Together with Russia" has the backing of Moscow.
The Crimea situation, the referendum, is also happening during this period very quickly.
Крымский референдум инициировали жители
Крыма. They had the referendum on the calendar to vote on the separation. And so the separation from Ukraine, and this happens in Donbass as well, that's different from the annexation by Russia. So I was using the Declaration of Independence in the first part of the podcast. Now I want you to think about Texas. Texas wins their independence from Mexico, and the United States doesn't accept Texas into the Union right away. Texas is its own country. That's why it's the Lone Star State, because it was its own country for about a decade before the United States accepted Texas into the Union. So what you have to understand about Crimea and the Donbass region, they set the referendums. Don't have anything to do with Russia. They vote to separate and become separate. Then Russia has to accept them and annex them, which is something that is totally different. In Donbass, they declared their independence, voted for independence in 2014. Russia does not annex them and accept them into Russia until the invasion in 2022. In Crimea, because of Crimea's strategic situation in the Black Sea, the naval base there, when Crimea voted for their independence, Russia annexed them and accepted them right away. But it's two different things. That the people in Crimea were running the referendum. They were voting for separation, and then they had to go to Russia and ask Russia to annex them. This is what the media in the United States is not telling you.
Happening during this period very quickly.
Крымский референдум инициировали
The
жители
referendum,
Крыма.
where he says right here, the Crimea referendum, this is Viktor Yanukovych, and he does this, he's interviewed, and that's why this movie is so good. If you haven't watched it, I highly recommend it. Oliver Stone is a great filmmaker. He interviews Yanukovych, he interviews Putin, but this is Yanukovych saying here, the Crimea referendum was initiated by the Crimean people, had nothing to do with Russia, had nothing to do with Russia at all. The people in Crimea who identify with Russia voted. They wanted to separate from Ukraine.
Это была их реакция на...
Here, this is what Yanukovych is saying. It was their response to the Maidan representatives trying to arrange another Maidan in Crimea. The Nazis were coming down and they were threatening them. They were trying to arrange another Maidan in Crimea.
На попытки представителей Майдана устроить такой Майдан в Крыму. Это не секрет, что население Крыма всегда было пророссийски настроенным.
Crimean authorities, sensing the mood of the populace, fully supported Viktor Yanukovych's decision to postpone the 2013 European Union Association deal and side deeper ties to Russia. As the events in Kiev took their course, Crimean authorities issued a declaration, putting into words the fears of its people. Based on the will of the Crimeans who elected us, we declare that we will not give Crimea to extremists and neo-Nazis seeking to seize power in Ukraine at the cost of the blood of the country and its citizens. After the regime change in Kiev, rumors began spreading in Crimea that the new authorities would be merciless to those that opposed them.
So after the coup, the rumors began to spread that the Nazis were on their way. They're coming down. They actually, I don't have time to show you in this podcast, but there's only 2 roads from the mainland Ukraine into Crimea, and the Nazis has blocked the roads. They weren't letting anything in, any food, anything, and they were already acting aggressive. They had already tried to outlaw the Russian language or to repeal the 2012 law that Yanukovych had implemented, making Russia the official language in these areas. They had already acted hostile towards these people. So these people took action
to postpone the 2013 European Union Association deal and side deeper ties to Russia. As the events in Kiev took their course, Crimean authorities issued a declaration, putting into words the fears of its people. Based on the will of the Crimeans who elected us, we declare that we will not give Crimea to extremists and neo-Nazis seeking to seize power in Ukraine at the cost of the blood of the country and its citizens. After the regime change in Kiev, rumors began spreading in Crimea that the new authorities would be merciless to those that opposed them.
Slava Ukraini!
This led to the pro-Russian demonstrations rejecting the new government in Kiev.
This is in Crimea. These are the pro-Russian demonstrations in Crimea.
This led
with the Russian flags. Look at all these people. They look like Russia's taking them over. Does it look like Russia invaded this place? Look at these flags. Does it look like Russia's invading people?
To the pro-Russian demonstrations rejecting the new government in Kiev. On February 27th, the government buildings in the capital of Crimea were seized by pro-Russian protesters.
Now, this is February 27th. I mean, this is just 4 days after the coup and 3 days after they tried to outlaw the Russian language.
The government buildings in the capital of Crimea were seized by pro-Russian protesters. The current Crimean government was dismissed, and the new leader, Sergei Aksyonov, was assigned as the leader of the Crimean Autonomous Republic.
Russia didn't have anything to do with this. This is all the people in Crimea. This is all the people in Crimea, doing what we did in 1776 when we penned the Declaration of Independence and declared our independence and our separation. That's what these people are doing in Crimea.
У них, конечно, надежда была, и они обращались к российскому руководству, чтобы их защитили.
On March 16th, the Crimean referendum was held, and the people voted to leave Ukraine and enter the Russian Federation.
Democracy, people. Again, I'm telling you, the people that are screaming about democracy hate democracy. They're the people who hate democracy the most.
And the people voted to leave Ukraine and enter the Russian Federation.
The situation in Crimea is being presented as a Russian invasion. And again, nobody who looks at this seriously and looks at the poll numbers, some of the poll numbers done by the U.S. government agencies themselves, showing that the people of Crimea preferred being part of Russia. In the U.S. news media, it has all been presented as the Russians invaded. They then staged a sham election.
Propaganda.
With people with guns at their backs. Somehow they faked the ballot boxes to get 96% approval for rejoining Russia.
The idea of a referendum in Crimea is just quite simply unconstitutional.
It does raise...
Unconstitutional. Like it was constitutional to stage a coup and to oust Viktor Yanukovych. It's hilarious. Absolutely hilarious. Take a look at this clip, and then we'll pick this up on Friday because I still have a lot more that I want to share with you guys. But does it look like these people are being invaded?
Crimeans voted overwhelmingly on Sunday to break away from Ukraine and join Russia in a referendum the West condemned as illegal. With half the ballots counted, 95.5% of Crimea residents voted to break away from Ukraine, according to local officials.
I mean, the numbers were insane, over 90%. And yes, the Muslim Tartars, so there's a small population of Muslim Tartars on Crimea that boycotted, that didn't vote. They were going to lose anyway. It didn't matter. They were going to lose the referendum anyway. So it didn't matter if they voted or not. These were some protests, in Crimea right before the referendum, and there were a few people who identified with Ukraine and with the new government in Ukraine, and that didn't want to separate. And I mean, not everybody in Crimea wanted to separate. Yes, there was a minority of Tartars, there were a minority of Ukrainians down there that wanted to stay with Ukraine, but the vast majority wanted to separate, and they did so by referendum. They voted.
This is the first sizable pro-Ukraine protest that we've seen in Crimea yet, and we've already been here almost a week, and you can really tell
it's sizable. Look at how many people are here. This is not sizable compared to the crowds that are pro-Russia.
It's not Russia quite yet, because if this was Russia, the police would already be here chasing these people off of the square.
So listen to what he's saying. This is Vice News. Vice News did excellent reporting, just like the BBC and other foreign news. Not our news. Here in the United States, we got terrible news, but listen to what this guy's saying. He's saying that this is not Russia yet. So they tell us that that the Russians invaded and the Russians were on the streets in Crimea and they were overseeing this referendum and made it illegal. This Vice reporter saying that this isn't Russia and that the Russians aren't here. They're letting people protest. They're letting people demonstrate in opposition to the referendum.
Quite yet, because if this was Russia, the police would already be here chasing these people off of the square. Для чего вы вышли на митинг сегодня?
Мы вышли на митинг, потому что мы против присоединения Крыма к России, и это...
So she doesn't want to join the Russian Federation. So anyway, the Obama administration said that these elections, they were not legitimate. The UN, who would come in and oversee these elections, they refused to come in and oversee these elections because if you remember the Victoria Nuland phone call when she says F the EU, the Obama administration had already gotten the UN to work with them. So the UN's not going to go into Crimea and Donbass and oversee those elections. So the Obama administration in the West said that those referendums, these are the people screaming about democracy. Democracy, democracy, democracy. But he said those elections weren't fair. And so that's where we are now. I have more to share with you, and I'll share it with you on Friday. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and we'll see you guys on Friday. Thanks for